And Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif spoke in Washington, D.C. today before he meets with President Obama. This is what he had to say about drone strikes in his country.
The use of drones is not only a continued violation of our territorial integrity, but also detrimental to our resolve and efforts at eliminating terrorism from our country.
Joining me now to discuss the findings of the report and the implications of these drone strikes in Pakistan is Naureen Shah. She's an advocacy advisor at Amnesty International USA. Thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, we just saw a little bit of you in that piece before, but I want to start off by talking about the White House response. Just a little bit earlier today, Press Secretary Jay Carney came out and said that the Obama administration strongly disagrees with assertions that the U.S. violated international law with these drone strikes. What do you have to say to that?
Well, the main problem with the Obama administration's responses to all the criticisms of the drone campaign is that it's provided assurances of legality without providing any proof. We're asking that the Obama administration investigate these cases and explain why they occurred, why a 68-year-old grandmother was killed, why a 14-year-old boy was killed.
And in particular, your Amnesty International report focuses on two cases that you say was a violation of international law. Can you quickly walk us through them and what specifically makes them that violation?
68-year-old grandmother Mamina Bibi went out to gather vegetables in her family fields that were largely vacant. She was killed by a drone strike right before the eyes of some of her grandchildren. Amnesty International looked into this case. We were very careful about our documentation, and we couldn't find any evidence that there were militants nearby. Of course, we didn't find evidence that grandmother Mamina Bibi posed an imminent threat herself. Ultimately, the U.S. government has responsibility here. It should, if it has any answers, provide those to the American public and the international community.
And in some of the cases that you guys have gone through and really looked at, you have brought up war crimes. Now, can you go into a little bit more detail about the war crimes and what makes something a war crime in this case?
Well, war crime would be a deliberate killing of a civilian or other categories of individuals. So in some of the cases that we're looking at, the U.S. conducts a strike, and then rescuers rush in, trying to recover the wounded, the dead bodies. They're bringing stretchers. They're trying to render medical aid. When the U.S. government targets in a second time in what we call a follow-up or rescuer strike, 10 minutes after the initial strike, it can result in the killing of civilians. If the U.S. government did that deliberately, knowing that those who were rushing in were civilians with protection under international law and who were not participating in hostilities, then they would be conducting war crimes. Or if we were outside of a war zone, it would be an extrajudicial execution.
So let's talk about the timing of this report. Obviously, it happened in couplement with the Human Rights Watch report that came out about Yemen, and also one day before Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif came into town. Why did you guys decide to release this report on this specific day?
Well, this is the time when it's necessary to press the Obama administration. You know, we've seen a lot of other important stories come out over the summer, including about the NSA surveillance scandal. There's so much secrecy going on with the Obama administration's counterterrorism policies. With the UN pressing this, we thought it was high time for us also to bring forth the new evidence that we have of potentially unlawful deaths.
And do you think that there's any kind of potential repercussions that we are seeing and this potential warm-up between Pakistan and the U.S. In light of these two reports?
You know, one thing to note is that the Pakistani government itself has obligations for some of the human rights violations that are occurring. We not only documented U.S. drone strikes, we documented a cruel nature of the abuses that are occurring by militant groups that are operating in the region, and also by Pakistani military forces that are conducting attacks, sometimes indiscriminately. So we're talking about a population in North Waziristan that is not only facing U.S. drone strikes, but also facing the threats of violence elsewhere. And the U.S. government and the Pakistani government both have obligations to recognize that harm and dignify what's happening to these people.
So can you go into a little bit more detail for us about how you went about, how your organization went about collecting these stories, collecting these reports, and some of the possible troubles that you had along the way?
This is a highly politicized issue, and there's a lot of speculation and a lot of propaganda out there about it. We tried to document specific cases in the part of North Waziristan where our researchers could actually get access, and although there was a lot of danger there, we were able to send in separate teams to conduct multiple interviews. We corroborated the eyewitness accounts that we received with satellite imagery, with video. We got as much documentation as we could, and this is one of the most deeply documented reports on drone strikes there is out there. All the same, we don't have all the answers, and one of the reasons is because of the U.S. government's policy of secrecy. It has to come forward and say what happened in these cases and answer the claims that we have made in our report.
Now, we've heard a number of accusations of war crimes by U.S. presidents before, but the U.S. is very unlikely to actually go forth and prosecute people for such war crimes in recent history anyway. What is your group hoping will come from these reports?
We're hoping that President Obama will go further. Half a year ago, he made pledges of transparency on drone strikes. We didn't see any follow-through. What we're asking him to do now is to immediately commit to investigating the cases that we, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have documented in our report.
I thank you so much for joining me and for bringing shedding some more light on these reports. Obviously, it's a lot to go through, and we're going to have to keep following up with your group, your organization, in the days to come in case anything else comes out. Naureen Shah is the advocacy advisor at Amnesty International USA.